Postman Pat and the Mystery Thief. Story by John Cudliffe. Pictures by Celia Burridge. From the original television design by Ivor Wood. One sunny morning, Postman Pat was hurrying along the road with a truckload of letters and parcels for the people of Greendale. Over a hill and around the corner, he had jammed on his brakes because the road was full of sheep. Pat's cat Jess wanted to know what was going on. He popped his head out of the open window to have a look. Just then, a big ram and a grey with great curly horns pushed up to the truck, right in Jess's face. What a fright they both had! Jess jumped down into his basket, and Pat stroked him to cheer him up. Peter Fogg was driving his sheep across the road with his dogs, Bess and Ben. He opened the gate, and the sheep went into the field, baying and following their leader. Peter waved as he fastened the gate, and Pat was on his way. But he soon had to stop again. This time for a herd of cows. The cows would walk slowly by. They never hurried. Mr. Thompson was walking behind them. He waved his stick and shouted, "Get up then!" But it made no difference. The cows moved, stopped to munch the roadside grasses, and took their time. When the road was clear of us, Mr. Thompson waved to Pat, and Pat was on his way again. When Pat stopped at the village school, he saw Charlie Pringle carrying a bunch of flowers. "What lovely flowers," said Pat. "They're for lovely spring display," said Charlie. "We'll bring something. Look, here comes Lucy, and Katie, and Tom." They all had something special. Lucy Shelby had brought a basket of eggs, and Tom Pyatt a box of day-old chicks. They all showed Pat what they had brought. Bill Thompson brought a cup of tea for Pat and collected the letters. Then Pat was off again. Away up the steep hills and winding roads, in and out of the farmyards he went, delivering cards and letters and parcels. There was an urgent package of medicine for Dr. Forsyth, the vet, and a sweepstake notice for Dr. George Lancaster. "I wonder if he wants something," said Pat, but George was out in the fields, so he couldn't ask him. It was just about lunchtime, and Pat was on the hill above Thompson ground. "What a nice place for a picnic," he said, so he parked his truck on the grass by the roadside and just jumped out, glad to stretch his legs. Pat locked the truck. They found a sunny place to sit in the field with a grassy slope to lean against. Several of Mrs. Thompson's hens were scratching about along the hedges. From the high hill, Pat could see the whole valley, with the Thompsons' farm on the steep hillside just below where he was sitting. Pat thought he could almost peep down the chimney and see Mrs. Thompson putting the kettle on the fire. Jess was thinking about Pat's lunchbox and hoping there was a can of sardines in it. Pat placed the box on the grass, with his keys neatly beside it so as not to forget them. Then he opened the box. Jess was in luck. There was a whole can of sardines to share with Pat, as well as sandwiches, an apple, a yogurt, and a big slice of cherry cake. They began to eat, but it was so warm in the sun that both Pat and Jess began to feel sleepy. They closed their eyes. Mrs. Thompson's hens were not a bit sleepy. They had spotted Pat's food, too. They pecked their way nearer and nearer to Pat and Jess and the open lunchbox. Then a noise awakened Pat. He sat up and blinked. 2 hens were running away with sandwiches in their beaks, and a third was pecking at the yogurt. Pat shouted and jumped up and chased the hens, but he couldn't catch them. Jess chased another into the hedge. Pat ran back to the lunchbox just in time to see another bold hen running away with his keys in her beak. He chased her down the hill, but she spread her wings and flew into a tree. "I must get my keys," said Pat. "I cannot open my truck to deliver my letters without them. Dear me, it's a long time since I climbed a tree, but I better try." Jess stretched his paws up the trunk of the tree, digging his claws in and glaring up at the hen. He could easily climb, but he knew that he couldn't get down again. The bold hen sat on a high branch, with the keys in her beak, looking down at Pat and Jess. Pat began to climb nearer and nearer to the hen. He was just reaching out to grab the keys when the hen dropped them into a hole in the tree and flew off into the farmyard with a loud squawk. Now Pat had to climb higher and to search for his keys. He put his foot on a rotten branch. Crack! It gave way, and Pat and the branch came tumbling down. Pat landed in the middle of a prickly bush. It broke his fall, but it scratched and prickled him all over. Mrs. Thompson had heard the commotion and came out to see what was going on. She helped Pat out of the bush and pulled the prickles out of him. He told her all about the thieving hens. "Dear me," said Mrs. Thompson. "One would think she's a magpie. They're the ones for taking anything shiny. We better get a ladder and see if we can find your key." "There'll be no mail delivered in the valley unless we do," said Pat. "That won't do," said Mrs. Thompson, "especially when I'm expecting a letter from Auntie Jean to say if she's coming for Easter." So they got the ladder and leaned against the tree. Pat climbed up easy now. While Mrs. Thompson held the ladder, Pat looked among the branches and found the hollow tree. The hen had dropped his keys. He found a lot of other things there, too. "It's like a nest," he said, "a magpie's nest." He brought everything down to show Mrs. Thompson. There were all kinds of shiny things, bits of glass, wire, a ball cap, buttons, a doll's eye, and some larger among the glittery pieces, as well as Pat's keys. "That's my wedding ring they've been missing since last Easter. I thought I lost it down the sink," cried Mrs. Thompson. "I am glad to see it again." She wiped it clean off on her dress and put it on her finger. When they had to put the ladder away, she said, "My hens have stolen your sandwiches, so you better come and have some lunch with me. There's plenty to spare." Pat was glad he lost his sandwiches when he saw what a good lunch Mrs. Thompson had prepared. So was Jess. He had a tasty plate of fish and a bowl of creamy milk. It was much better than ever, the best of sandwiches. Mrs. Thompson was happy, too, to see her ring shining on her finger once more. It was time to be on their way, and Pat said goodbye and thank you to Mrs. Thompson. As they drove along, Pat's pocket jingled with all the shiny things he had found in the tree. "Just imagine," he said, "a magpie hen. Who ever heard of such a thing?" Jess wondered what a magpie cat would collect. Farther along the road, they saw the delivery truck, and Pat stopped to have a chat with Sam Wardon. He told Sam the story of the magpie hen. "She better keep away from my truck," he said. "I wonder if that's where my tie pin went." Pat showed him the hen's collection, but there was no tie pins among the glittery bits. Pat went on his way. He had some letters for Miss Hubbard, and he told her about the magpie hen. "Well," she said, "I lost a silver earring last month, and a hat pin. I wonder if they're up a tree somewhere." Pat showed her the glittery bits. "That hen could have another hoard in another tree," she said. "I must go and see Mrs. Thompson and have a good look." Along by Garner Bridge, Pat met George Lancaster on his tractor and stopped to tell him about the thieving magpie hen. George couldn't think of anything he lost, but he thought he made a good story. "Well, but you might have won something," said Pat. There's a letter for you from the sweepstakes you entered." "Is there? By Jove, I'll be off then," said George, and he sped away at top speed. On the way home, Pat saw some real magpies and wondered if they had taught Mrs. Thompson's hens how to steal. As for Jess, he was falling asleep. The end. And this is Craigie Vaver saying, if you like this video, click like and subscribe. And happy 4th of July.